Do you ever look back and cringe on a parenting decision? I know I have. You can't go back and change the past, and I want to suggest that maybe you shouldn't want to. Those moments you regret, they taught you something. They humanized you in your child's eyes, and they helped shape the version of you that's here now. Still learning, still showing up. So instead of rewriting the past or aiming for some perfect version of the future, let's look at those parenting choices with the full story, not just the guilt. So those cringy parenting decisions, maybe you let your child spend hours on a tablet, or you snapped when you were overwhelmed, or you gave in to something you swore you wouldn't, like buying a toy at the toy store or candy at the grocery store. Or something more consequential, like not signing your child up for a particular therapy or activity. And now you're dragging that moment around like a suitcase full of bricks. I know that if parenting guilt were an Olympic sport, I'd be on that podium with a gold medal with a side of emotional baggage. But here's what I've learned. Guilt isn't just heavy, it's also misleading, especially if you're already a conscientious parent. Guilt doesn't make you better, it just makes you tired. So let's look at what was really going on when you made those decisions. Guilt is sneaky because it erases the full story. We remember the decision we regret, but not all of the context that led to it. Sometimes we judge past action with present knowledge, and we rarely give ourselves credit for the fact that we were making the best decisions we could at the time with the information and resources that we had. Some of the common guilt triggers I hear about a lot are too much screen time, too much sugar, taking shortcuts, losing patience, or sometimes bigger issues like failing to push harder for certain services at school, or failing to give their child enough speech or OT, or whatever upon reflection they wish they had done in the past. When we feel guilty about things, we tend to forget that we were balancing competing priorities when we made the decisions we made. I remember speaking with one mom who was in tears because she said she wished she had gotten her child more occupational therapy when he was younger. And when we talked about it, we talked about, well, why didn't you? Why did you make that decision? Well, it turned out she couldn't afford it. It was also an hour away from her home, so she really couldn't take her son there for a 45-minute appointment. There were a lot of really good reasons in context why it wasn't really a practical decision. So this tends to hit a little close to home for me too, because I do tend to sometimes feel guilty about not pursuing certain therapies with my son. But it wasn't like we weren't doing anything. We were doing other things. And at the time, I obviously thought those were important. I also sometimes do a silly thing to myself where I feel guilty about not pursuing a therapy I didn't even know about. So how that makes sense, I don't know. So feeling guilty today because we're rewriting history and we're thinking somehow we should have changed our context isn't really realistic. And the question here is, can you reframe it so that you don't have to drag yourself down with guilt? You can do that by asking yourself better questions. Instead of asking yourself, was that the perfect decision? You can ask yourself, why did I make that decision? What was I trying to protect, prevent, or preserve in that moment? You could also ask, why was that the best decision at that moment? Because it's not about justifying a mistake, but to place it back in the realistic context. Maybe you let your child watch more videos than usual or more than you'd like, but maybe they needed the downtime. Maybe your decision was based on that. And a week later, we tend to forget that context. Or maybe you needed 20 minutes to book a specialist or prep for an IEP meeting. And in that moment, that mattered more than one more story. A common guilt-inducing moment in parenting is losing your cool. Whether it's yelling, snapping, slamming a door, whatever that looks like for you, those are moments that haunt us. So if it's a rare moment, something that happens once in a while, you actually have a huge opportunity in front of you. That moment can become a model. You apologize, name the emotion, and talk to your child about how you're working on managing big feelings. That's powerful stuff. It's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about showing your child what repair looks like. And they love it when you apologize to them. But if yelling is something that's happening a lot, if it's your default mode when things get hard, then we need to zoom out, because clearly guilt isn't helping you change. If it were, the habit would already be gone. That's the thing about guilt. When it's not paired with insight and tools, it just makes you feel worse without helping you do better. This isn't about shame, it's about noticing when a strategy isn't working. If guilt hasn't helped you stop yelling, then let's stop relying on guilt. You don't need more regret, you need a new approach. One quick side note on that new approach, it's about seeing your child's behavior in a different light. It's about being willing to understand that their behavior is based on an unmet need or an undeveloped skill instead of pure defiance. But that's a topic for an entirely different video. We can tackle that another time. Now back to guilt. So instead of beating yourself up and getting stuck in guilt the next time you yell, spend that time instead asking yourself, how can I interrupt this impulse to yell? That's all. You just look for an opportunity. Is there a place where I can take a deep breath or create a mantra in my mind? Because spending your time on guilt isn't solving the problem. So ditch the guilt and spend your time thinking about what can I do differently. And here's a truth that changes everything. Your child struggles in the exact same way that you do. Just like you sometimes yell even though you know you don't want to, your child also sometimes melts down, ignores instructions, or lashes out even when they don't want to. It's not always defiance. Sometimes it's a shortcut, a desperate move, the best they could muster in that moment, just like us. And when we stop labeling every hard behavior as a moral failing for them or for us, we finally have room to see what's really going on underneath. That's when real change can start. So here's how you can reframe the guilt. Instead of saying, I messed up, start by asking, what made that feel like the best or only option in the moment? And then show yourself some grace. You can also ask, what was I juggling at the time? And then show yourself some more grace. And you can ask, what can I learn from that moment without shaming myself? Each of those questions makes space for reflection, not self-punishment. That's where the real growth lives. And just like we talk about how support helps our children grow more than punishment, guess who else that applies to? Yep, you. Growth doesn't come from beating yourself up. It comes from understanding yourself better. But if you're running on guilt-fueled thoughts, you don't parent better, you parent more frantically. Self-reflection without self-blame is the key to sustainable growth. It's not about lowering your standards, it's about raising your compassion. Guilt should be a signal, not a sentence. If it leads to insight, great. If it makes you feel terrible, it's not working for you. A better motivator than guilt? Understanding. When you understand what went wrong and why, you're far more likely to handle it differently next time. Not because you feel guilty, but because you feel clear. You're not failing, you're evolving. At least it sounds so much better. But actually, the best parents aren't perfect. There is research that proves that. The best parents are honest with themselves and willing to grow. So instead of spending your energy on guilt, I hope you use it to either figure out a new approach to something that isn't working or bring yourself some peace, because when you put it back in context, you realize you did a pretty great job. If there's something that still haunts you, drop it in the comments or just write same so we can start to talk about some real life context around those memories and start giving ourselves some credit. I hope this was helpful for you, and if you enjoyed it, you'd give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet subscribed, I hope you'll consider doing so. And I'll see you in the next one.